your textbook the other day, and let's just recap. There are actually a couple of words that I want to make sure that if you didn't use them, you add them so that you know how to use them in the future. The first thing that we're going to talk about today is glomerular filtration. This is the part where we create a filtrate from your blood. So according to your textbook, what we're doing in the first part of this is taking things from your blood and putting them into the nephron. And the word that we would use is filtrate. If you didn't use that word, please add it to your description, because this is definitely a word that I would use. We won't call what's in your nephron urine until we get to the very, very end of the nephron. So while we are still adjusting the concentration of all of the substances that are there, we'll call it the filtrate until we get to the end of the nephron, and I'll show you where we're going to start to call it actually urine. Now, as this filtrate moves through your nephron, three other things happen. Thing 2 and thing 4 are really similar. We're reabsorbing things, but we're going to talk about them separately because they're actually two separate steps that have to happen. Tubular reabsorption, and re indicates that we're taking it back. Tubular reabsorption is where useful substances go back to the blood. So we'll see that your body is not going to give up glucose unless it absolutely has to. That's a useful substance. Tubular secretion and tubular reabsorption are kind of the opposite. Tubular secretion is where substances that your body does not want are added. And so this is where we add substances to the filtrate, and we'll talk about which substances they are and where this happens. But lastly, we have water reabsorption specifically. Water will move back to the blood, just like other useful substances in number 2. But the way that this is accomplished happens in a couple of steps, so that's why we'll talk about water separately. So what I thought we would do is, together, sketch out a little picture of a nephron so I can show you from scratch how to draw one so that it kind of looks like a nephron. That's what the big, huge piece of paper is for. And we'll illustrate on it what is happening in each part of the nephron so that you can associate parts of the nephron with functions that they're actually accomplishing. So we're going to start by talking about the very first part of the nephron and the blood vessels that are there. So way over on the left side of the page, what I suggest you draw is a little backwards C. And inside the little backwards C, I'm going to illustrate some blood going in. And you'll notice that on purpose, I'm making the blood vessels that are going in look kind of crisscrossed there, and I'll talk about why I did that. So just so we know what we're looking at, this piece here is Bowman's capsule. The blood vessel that we'll be looking at is part of the renal artery. The part coming in is the afferent arteriole, and the part coming out is the efferent arteriole. And blood is going to flow in this direction. The big crisscrossy shaped lump that is in the middle is the glomerulus. And so this is the spot, this is the place where the first step or the first process happens. So this is where we have filtration. Here are some things that are important to know about filtration. First of all, we have what are called fenestrated capillaries. So on purpose, I drew a bunch of crisscrossy lines there on the glomerulus. That's to show that there are basically pores. And so the glomerulus is where blood is going to get pushed into your nephron. Sometimes this is called force filtration because it depends on blood pressure. And so the higher your blood pressure, the more force the blood is pushed with. So what we will see happening is that substances will move from the glomerulus into Bowman's capsule. So we are going to start producing the filtrate. Now most substances can fit through the pores. Here are some exceptions. Proteins should not fit, neither should blood cells. They're too big. If a protein or a blood cell was found in the filtrate, that would indicate a problem. And one of the things we'll do later this week is a urinalysis, where I provide you with data about what we find in people's urines, and we'll associate that with conditions that they might have that are causing abnormal substances. So, proteins and red blood cells are not going to be filtered. Otherwise, the filtrate is like the plasma of your blood. It has the same substances in it. So if you had glucose in your blood, there will be glucose in the filtrate. If you had urea in your blood, there will be urea in the filtrate. The only two things that shouldn't be in the filtrate would be proteins and blood cells. They're too big. Now, just to give you an idea of how much of this is happening, every minute, so in 1 minute, in one of your kidneys, we will get somewhere in the neighborhood, and like this is an estimate, but 600 milliliters of blood flowing through, being filtered every minute. Of that 600 milliliters of blood, 120 milliliters becomes part of the filtrate. So if you're counting, that's about 20%. Now these are just estimate numbers. I'm not going to focus on you memorizing the numbers. I just want you to get an idea of relatively how much that is. So it's in the neighborhood of 20%. So 20% of the volume of your blood gets pushed through the pores, or the fenestrated capillaries, from your glomerulus into Bowman's capsule. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask about this first step here? So then we'll keep going. The next piece of your nephron, I would draw more or less like this. I'm not being completely anatomically correct here. I'm making it so that it's easier to draw. This piece here is called the proximal convoluted tubule. Then it dips down in this long loopy structure, which is called the loop of Henle, we come back up to another squiggly line. So in a lot of pictures, these lines, the proximal convoluted tubule, and this one here, the distal convoluted tubule, are shown as lines that kind of cross over each other, and that's a little more anatomically correct. I'm drawing it like this so that we can see things clearly without them crossing over top of each other. At the end, this connects to a big long tube that will have branches sticking out of it. And this is called the collecting duct. Yes. Convoluted tubule. It's the same as the name on the left side of the loop of Henle. So we're going to talk about which processes happen in which parts of your nephron. We know that we're reabsorbing substances that we want to keep, and substances that we don't want are being secreted, but it happens in pretty specific spots on your nephron. So first we'll talk about things that we would like to keep, things that we are reabsorbing. Now, reabsorption happens in a few different places as we move along the nephron. But here are the things that we would like to recognize. When I draw an arrow coming out of the nephron, I'm indicating that a substance is being taken from the filtrate back into the blood. I'm not going to draw the blood vessels over top of this because it'll make the diagram a little harder to read. But if the arrow goes out of the tube, that means it's going back into the blood. If the arrow comes into the tube, that means that it's going into the filtrate. Now here, we have water being reabsorbed. We also have sodium being reabsorbed, and I'm going to talk about the two of those first. Now, in the loop of Henle, I'd like to remind you all that this part dips down into the medulla of the kidney. So most of the nephron is up in the cortex, but as we get down into the bottom part of the loop of Henle, now we've dipped down into the medulla. When we did our dissection, that was the part that was like a dark colored triangle. And here's what happens specifically in the loop of Henle. Sodium is reabsorbed by active transport. That means that your body is going to expend ATP on purpose to move as much sodium as it can out of the filtrate and back into the blood vessels that are surrounding the loop of Henle in the medulla. You might hear people refer to the medulla as a salty portion of the kidney, and this is why, is because we're actively reabsorbing sodium. Now, water is being reabsorbed too, but the reabsorption is passive. The reason that we call it passive is because no cell energy is required for the movement of water. The reason that water will move is because of osmosis. Now, the rules of osmosis say that water will always move to an area where the concentration is high. So water is always trying to even things out. If concentration is higher in one spot, water will move there to try to dilute it. So because I have actively transported sodium, water is going to follow passively. The word that I might use to describe the scenario down here is the word hypertonic. What I'm saying is that the tissue around the nephron, so the blood vessels and all of that, is hypertonic. Hyper means large or high, and tonic means concentration. So what is surrounding the loop of Henle is very hypertonic. Water always wants to go where the concentration is high. Now there are other things that are reabsorbed besides sodium. I always like to mention sodium first because it's one of the main reasons that water is reabsorbed as well. Now water is also reabsorbed over here in the collecting duct. It's not just the loop of Henle. And we'll talk a little bit more about hormones that tell your body to reabsorb water so that you have enough. But water is reabsorbed there as well. Now other substances that will come out of the filtrate in the proximal and the distal convoluted tubule would be things like glucose, would be things like amino acids. Those are substances that your body generally is going to hang on to and do more things with. Does anyone want to ask any questions about reabsorption so far? Would someone who's close to the back mind shutting the door? Whatever they're doing out there is awfully noisy. Now there are some other substances that will normally be reabsorbed as well. The other substances are chloride ions and bicarbonate ions. So that's Cl for chloride, HCO3 for bicarbonate. And you'll notice that I indicated that they were negative. These negative ions are usually attracted to positive charges. And if I'm actively reabsorbing sodium, which is a positive ion, those negative ions will naturally follow. Very often, amino acids require active transport, and glucose requires active transport to be reabsorbed. So when I get to the end of my nephron, here's what I should see. I should see, coming out here, urine. And this urine should not contain much of the substances that we have reabsorbed. There might be a small, minuscule amount of them, but I am looking for basically no glucose, no amino acids, and I'm looking for low amounts of water and sodium, because most of that should have been reabsorbed. If I were to show you an example where the person had the same amount of glucose at the end of the nephron as they did in the initial filtrate, well, that would be a problem. That would be indicating that that person was not reabsorbing glucose, or that they had so much glucose in their system that their body couldn't reabsorb it. Now we need to talk about the substances that get added in to the filtrate. Substances that get added into the filtrate, we refer to this as secretion. And so I'll show secretion with arrows that point inwards. Now generally secretion happens in the convoluted tubules. Not a lot of it happens in the loop of Henle. It can also happen in the collecting duct. So if we talk about secretion, a few of the things we would look for right away would be ammonia, because we know that our body is making ammonia. we would look for urea or uric acid. Those are the three substances that your liver is producing by breaking apart an amino acid. And we know that all of those substances will be transported out of the blood into the nephron, into the filtrate. We would also have things like hydrogen ions. We'll talk about how your kidney is involved with regulating the pH in your body, and this is why it can help you get rid of excess hydrogen ions, helping you keep acid-base balance. We can also get rid of something like potassium. Now, I'll just call this a mineral. Any sort of ion that your body has too much of could be secreted here, and there's not a specific right or wrong answer. For example, if you were like my 2-year-old daughter and this morning you scarfed down like 15 frozen gummy vitamins, because that's what she did, she will be excreting most of what she consumed because her body cannot possibly need that much of those vitamins in one day. And so any mineral or vitamin that is in excess will be secreted into your filtrate so that you can get rid of it. The other things that will go in would be things like excess drugs. So if you've been taking medication, if there is excess of it, if it is a recreational drug, the same thing would occur. Now the key thing with all of this secretion, so in the proximal and the distal convoluted tubule, as well as in the collecting duct, all of this requires energy. So I'm just going to make a note up here that secretion is active. It requires ATP. The reason it requires energy is because I'm trying to get all of it out. I would like to get all of the urea and all of the uric acid out. And if I depend just on diffusion, diffusion can only help me achieve an equilibrium. So I'm just going to pause here for a second. Does anyone still need what's on the screen to be showing? Question? No? Okay. So, oops. So we are going to talk about things that happen in your nephron in terms of hormones. So the first thing we'll talk about is the regulation of water, which is called Osmo Regulation. And so I'll just pause here for a second so people have a chance to have words down, and then we'll talk about them. So I'll just explain a few of the terms that are up here so that you can be sure that you know what they mean. ADH is the abbreviation for Antidiuretic Hormone. It comes from your pituitary gland, which is up in your brain. So that you know, a diuretic is any substance that increases urine volume. So there are several substances that you would be aware of that would be diuretics. For example, things that contain caffeine are diuretics. Things that contain alcohol are diuretics. Both of those substances would increase your urine volume. So ADH, antidiuretic hormone, is trying to oppose those effects. So ADH's job is to make your urine volume be smaller. In other words, it's helping you reabsorb more water. That is its goal. That's the function of this hormone. So the way that it does this specifically is that increases the permeability of the DCT. So on those pictures we just made, that's the distal convoluted tubule, the segment that comes between the loop of Henle and the collecting duct. It also increases the permeability of the collecting duct to water. So the idea is that more water could go from the filtrate back to the blood. If your nephron is more permeable to water, and we know that your urine is hypotonic compared to the hypertonic renal medulla, water will flow out of the collecting duct into the capillaries, decreasing urine volume. So the idea here is that water goes from the filtrate to the blood. So we're removing water from the filtrate. That is the goal of this hormone. Now, how does your body know to make that hormone? Well, you have some nerve cells called Osmo Receptors. See how it's called Osmo? This is called Osmo because we're talking about the osmosis of water. So these are nerve cells that detect changes in water concentration, and sometimes we call this osmotic pressure. So that you know how we would define this, if water concentration is high, osmotic pressure is low. So if there's lots of water, there's not a lot of pressure for osmosis to happen. If water concentration is low, then osmotic pressure is high. That means there's a lot of pressure on your body to accomplish osmosis and get some water. These receptors are in your brain in a place called your hypothalamus, just so that you know where we're talking about. Your hypothalamus is a structure right in sort of the center of your brain. If you think about your head being attached to the top of your neck, I often make the analogy when I'm teaching Bio20E that it's like an ice cream cone. What's coming up in your neck is the cone, and then when you get to your head, you have the big ball that's on the top. If I was to go straight up through my neck, right in the middle of my head, that's where your hypothalamus is. And then you have neurons that connect your hypothalamus down to your pituitary gland, which is this little thing. So your pituitary gland has two lobes. I'm aware that it looks like a pair of testicles, so you can laugh at it. It does. It looks like two hangy little ball things. But this is not anywhere visible. This is also in that center part of your head at the top of your brainstem. Anyways, your hypothalamus has these cells. They have the receptors. And they signal your pituitary gland, which is the source of the hormone, to produce more ADH whenever blood water concentration decreases. So if you take a look at the picture, this is the side that mentions Osmo Receptors, but then this part over here talks about your kidney. The reason that this doesn't just have your kidney on it is because water is not the only reason that ADH would be stimulated. Sometimes you have to think about more than one system in conjunction with another. And in this particular case, Osmo receptors work together with baroreceptors. Baro, when you see that at the beginning of a word, is always referring to pressure. If any of you are taking chem, you might recently have measured the pressure in the lab with a barometer. You would measure it in kilopascals usually. But baro refers to pressure. And so in conjunction with how much water there is in your blood pressure depends on this. If there's less water in your blood pressure is lower. If there's more water in your blood pressure is higher. So it's like you have a two-way system. Both of them are contributing to this process. Either we will have less water or less pressure. One of those two signals will reach your brain, and that will stimulate your body to produce ADH, Antidiuretic Hormone. It will make your blood vessels constrict, so that increases pressure. Again, I'll refer to chemistry concepts. If pressure goes up, volume goes down, and vice versa. So if I increase the pressure, or if I decrease the volume of my blood vessels by constricting them, the pressure will have to go up. If I increase water reabsorption, my blood pressure and my blood volume will also go up. Now we'll focus on the kidney part for now, but keep in mind we will talk about your circulatory system in the next couple of sections. So the two substances on this page, and I'm going to call them substances because one of them's a hormone and one of them's not, will both affect how much water is reabsorbed. The way I generally like to categorize them is with a plus and a minus. Aldosterone is helpful for water reabsorption, and alcohol, like I mentioned previously, is not helpful for water reabsorption. Now, aldosterone is a hormone. I'll just remind you that hormones travel in your blood around your body. This particular hormone comes from your adrenal cortex. And just to situate you on where that is, on your kidneys, there's a little gland on the top of it. And the very first picture that we colored had that in it, even though your textbook didn't label it. And so that is your adrenal gland. So it's a little gland that sits right on top of your kidney. And the adrenal cortex is the outside of that gland. So the ad means adjacent to. Renal always means kidney. Cortex means bark. So your adrenal cortex is the outside of the structure right next to your kidney. That's what the word means. In any case, aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption. That is its function. So aldosterone is not directly affecting water. But if I increase sodium reabsorption in all parts of the nephron, this leads to greater water reabsorption. I like to use the word indirect here. ADH is directly affecting water. It is specifically making your nephron more permeable to water, so more water gets reabsorbed. Aldosterone has the same end result, but its method of action is to increase sodium, and water will eventually follow that sodium that's being reabsorbed. Now, alcohol and other substances that fall into that category prevent your hypothalamus from stimulating your pituitary. So it's blocking a nerve signal. That means that I'm actually getting less ADH produced. So alcohol is not directly affecting water in your kidney either. It's making the hormone that would help you reabsorb water not be produced. The problem then is that you have large volumes of urine, and a definite problem when you have too much water in your urine is dehydration. So if you ever see a question saying that someone is dehydrated, that means that there was too much water in their urine, in this chapter anyways, and that either we had not enough ADH or too much of something that was preventing ADH's production. Now over on the side is a little flow chart to show you how your body responds to this. This little example here, of course, is an example of homeostasis because your body detects a change in its environment and responds to correct it. So this whole section here where we're talking about the hormones that control the balance of water, this would be an excellent thing to discuss if on a quest on October 31st, over here, I asked you to tell me how your kidney plays a role in homeostasis. This could be something that you could talk about. So, when you lose water, you increase toxicity. In other words, if there's less water, whatever is in your body is more concentrated because you have less water to dilute it. Two things will happen. ADH will be stimulated and you will feel thirsty. So ADH is not the only thing that's going to help you have the correct amount of water in your body. If you lose water, your body will make you feel thirsty. So you will drink water and you will reabsorb water. So you'll take back water from your urine and you'll add more water to your body. The result of this is dilution. Now, if your blood becomes too diluted and your brain detects that concentrations are not high enough, then we will inhibit ADH, so its secretion will stop. We will not be thirsty anymore. And we will go back to the situation where we lose water until we reach a balance. So this would be a never-ending cycle of your body constantly checking what is the concentration of the blood. Do I have too much water or not enough? If I have not enough, I need to be thirsty and I need ADH. If I have too much, I need no ADH and I need not to be thirsty. So in general, this section here isn't something new happening, it's us stopping the thing that we were doing before. Would anybody like to ask any questions about this little example here of homeostasis? So then we need to talk about how your kidneys help regulate pH. This would be another excellent example of homeostasis. So let's not worry about the diagram just for right now. Because the diagram actually shows everything, because I want to try to sum things up here. The key thing that you need to recognize is that anytime we talk about pH or acid-base balance, we are probably talking about hydrogen ions. So I already showed you earlier that hydrogen ions are actively transported, oops, I won't cover that word up, are actively transported from the blood into your nephron. It's called tubular secretion. The key is, if there is excess hydrogen, then the pH is too low. And if that's the case, then your body performs active transport to bring the pH back to normal. So I'll just pause here. Now, if you take a look at the picture that's here, you'll realize you just drew it. It's exactly what we just drew on this piece of paper. And I'm posting it here, pasting it here, because I'd like to sum up a couple of things about transport between your nephron and the blood that surrounds it. The first thing that I'd like to make note of is what's in the filtrate. Basically, everything that can fit through the pores will be in the filtrate. Does that mean that everything that's in your blood will be there? No, because remember, of 600 milliliters, only about 120 milliliters are pushed through. And so that means even if there was something your body wanted to get rid of, it's not all going to get into the filtrate on the first try. So in the filtrate, you will find a bunch of substances. You will find water. You will find all sorts of salts. Sodium chloride could be one of them. You'll find bicarbonate, HCO3, hydrogen, urea, glucose and amino acids, and potentially some drugs if there are any in your system. And what I want you to recognize is that even though your kidneys are going to secrete more of some of these in, some of it is present already. And so some people have the misconception that, oh, well, since my body is going to secrete this, there should not be any of it in the filtrate. And that's not true. Even though I'm going to secrete more hydrogen later, there's already going to be some hydrogen ions in the filtrate because they're naturally present as part of the plasma of blood. And I'm just